Good afternoon. Welcome to factoring polynomials with the coefficient of 1. If we look at this question, we have x squared plus 7x plus 10. When we're factoring polynomials, we have to think of two sets of parentheses, where we're going to have terms inside that, when we FOIL them, will give us a 7 in the middle and a 10 at the end. So what multiplies together to give us x squared? Well, if I put an x in the front of each of these bubbles, I'm going to get x squared when I multiply them together. Next we have to think about what if we multiply together will give us 10, but adds together to give us 7. So if I think about 10, I know that the number 5 and the number 2, when they multiply those numbers together, it'll give me 10. If I look at adding them together, if I looked at my inside terms, I'd get 5x. If I looked at my outside terms, I'd get 2x, and that added together gives me 7x. So I know that I factored it correctly. My terms are x plus 5 and x plus 2. But I need to figure out what x is. So I'm going to take each set of parentheses and make them equal to 0. So x plus 5 equals 0, and x plus 2 equals 0. So if I solve both of these equations for x, I'm going to subtract 5 from both sides. So here I get x equal to a negative 5. That's my first answer. And then I'm going to subtract 2 from both sides here. So I'm going to get x equals a negative 2 as my second answer on this side. So I have two answers, negative 5 and negative 2. Let's look at another example. Here we have q squared plus 3q plus 2. I know that I have to have two sets of parentheses. And I need something that the front parts will multiply together to give me q squared. So I'm going to put a q in the front of each of these sets of parentheses. Now I have to think about what multiplies together to give me 2, but will add together to give me 3. Well, I know the factors of 2 and 1. 2 times 1 will give me 2, and 2 plus 1 will give me 3. I'm going to put a plus in both of those parts. Because if I look at my inside terms, I'm going to get 2q. If I look at my outside terms, I'm going to get 1q. And if I add those together, that gives me 3q, which is what I was looking for there. Now I need to solve each of these sets of parentheses to figure out what the value of q actually is. So we're going to take q plus 2 equal to 0. And we're going to take q plus 1 equal to 0. That's 0. Here we're going to subtract 2 from both sides because we want to get the q by itself. So we know q is equal to a negative 2 to begin with. Here we're going to subtract 1 from both sides. So now we know that q is equal to a negative 1. So we have two answers. Q is equal to a negative 2 and q is equal to a negative 1. Let's look at another example. Here we want to think about what multiplies together to give me 1, but adds together to give me 2. So again, we're going to have our two sets of parentheses. We're going to think about what multiplies to give us x squared, and that's just an x in the front of both. To get 1, the only thing that does that is plus 1. So we're going to put plus 1 there. Because if we look at our inside term, we're going to get 1x. If we look at our outside term, we're going to get 1x. And we add those together, we get 2x, which is the term that we had there to begin with. So we know we did it right. So now let's take x plus 1, make it equal to 0. And we also have to take x plus 1 again and make it equal to 0. But we have something called the double root. Here we found the root of this part of the quadratic, which is x equals a negative 1. We find the root of this part of the quadratic. We're also going to get x equals to a negative 1. So you could say that x equals a negative 1, and sometimes they designate it with a dr for double root. Let's look at another example. Here we have x squared minus 5x minus 24 equals 0. We have to think about what multiplies together to give me a negative 24, but adds together to give me a negative 5. And here you're going to have to play around a little bit. Now we know the thing in the front has to be an x, because x times x will give us x squared. If I think about a negative 24, I'm actually going to write some different options for what I could multiply it together to do. I could take a negative 6 times 4. I could take a negative 3 times 8. I could multiply 6 times a negative 4. Negative 4. I could take 3 times a negative 8. All of these combinations would multiply together to give us a negative 24. But which one of those will add together to give us a negative 5? And there are a couple other options for a negative 24, but we're not going to use those today. If I look at a negative 6 plus 4, that gives me a negative 2. Well, I want a negative 5, so that doesn't work. If I take a negative 3 plus 8, that gives me a positive 5. That's almost the right answer, but we want a negative 5. So I'm going to go with this option. Because I know 3 times a negative 8 would give me a negative 24, and 3 minus 8 would give me a negative 5. So I'm going to say plus 3 and minus 8. So now I'm going to multiply these parts together. We're going to get x squared. We multiply that together. We get a negative 8x. If I multiply that together, I get plus 3x. And if I multiply that part together, I get a negative 24. This is just to check that I actually did it right when I picked my set of factors to multiply together. It does turn out that a negative 8x plus 3x will give me a negative 5x. I'm bringing down the x squared. And I'm bringing down the negative 24. So I know that I factored it correctly because I got back what I started with. Well, now I actually have to find out what are the values of x if I solve both of these sets of parentheses. So I'm going to take x plus 3 and make it equal to 0. I'm going to take the x minus 5, or x minus 8, and make it equal to 0. So to get x by itself, I'm going to subtract 3 from both sides. So we're going to get x equals negative 3. And here I'm going to take and add 8 to both sides. So I'm going to get x equals 8. So I have two different roots, x equals a negative 3 and x equals 8. Let's look at one more example. Here we have a positive 9 and a negative 10x. So we have to think about what multiplies together to give us a positive 9 but adds together to give us a negative 10. We know that both, if I take a negative times a negative, it'll give me a positive. So in this example, I want to have two negative numbers that I'm multiplying together. Well, if I have two negative numbers, I could take a negative 1 times a negative 9. Those numbers multiply together to give us a positive 9. But if I look at my inside, I'm going to get a negative 1x. If I look at my outside terms, I'm going to get a negative 9x. So when I add those together, I'm going to get a negative 10x, which is what I started with, so I know I did it right. So now I'm going to take the first term, x minus 1, and make it equal to 0. And I'm going to take the second factor, x minus 9, and make it equal to 0. So now I'm going to solve both of those. Add 1 to both sides. Here I'm going to add 9 to both sides. I'm going to get x equals 9. So now I have two roots, x equals 1 and x equals 9. So this is cross-multiplying, or this is factoring quadratic equations given a coefficient of 1. Have a great day. Bye.